Good evening. I'm Jonny Best, the Artistic Director of Northern Silent Film Festival, and we're here for Sounding the Silence. Good evening. I'm Jonny Best. Sorry, I was hearing myself on a delay there. We're here to talk all things silent film music with a range of musicians appearing at this year's Northern Silent Film Festival. So we'll start things off by asking each player to introduce themselves and say what they play and which films they're playing. So, Adam.
I'm Adam Fairhall. I play piano, and I've actually done my quota. The week before last, I played a couple of...
Each player to introduce themselves.
Laurel and Hardy's and a Buster Keaton at Weatherby. And then on the Friday, I played another Laurel and Hardy, a finishing touch, week before last up in Cumbria.
Player to introduce themselves.
Laurel and Hardy's and a Buster Keaton at Weatherby. And then on the Friday, I played another Laurel and Hardy, a finishing touch, week before last up in Cumbria.
Player to introduce themselves.
Laurel and Hardy's and a Buster Keaton at Weatherby. And then on the Friday, I played another Laurel and Hardy, finishing touch, week before last up in Cumbria.
Player to introduce themselves.
Laurel and Hardy's and a Buster Keaton.
Sorry, I've got some problems with audio. I can't hear anything. It's all gone horribly wrong. I can't hear a thing. And everything's frozen. Great.
Oh, sorry, Jonny. Can you hear me?
I can now hear you. Yes,
you can hear me.
Yes.
So yeah, maybe there was a bit of feedback with everybody's mics on, and we got, as Rob said, a Steve Reich piece by accident.
I heard,
which I actually rather enjoyed, but
I heard Trevor a lot. So who's spoken?
I think we just had Adam, didn't we? Is that?
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was mostly me doing the tape piece.
All right, let's try again. So, Jane, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jane Gardner. I'm based in Edinburgh, and I'm a pianist and composer. And I've been playing silent films for a long time, really, 20 years or so. So I've done quite a few different films from different approaches, and films on my own on piano and with collaboration members of our group of people I quite regularly play with. And I was playing at the Northern Silent Film Festival on Friday, a film called The Diary of a Lost Girl, starring Louise Brooks, which was kind of a tragedy drama, very, very dark film. And I'm currently working on a film for Friday at the Hippodrome Silent Film Festival Taster season, which is Salome, which is based on the Oscar Wilde play, and it's completely different sort of film and much more improvised.
Thank you. Ben and Rob, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Hello, yes, I'm Ben Gaunt. I'm predominantly keyboard player, but also doing a bit of electronics, and my recently bought melodica, of which I'm very fond. So they'll all be wheeled out next week for the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, alongside Rob and also Juliana, who's in the chat.
Hello, my name's Robert Bentall, and I play the nyckelharpa, which is a ancient Swedish keyed fiddle, which I might elaborate a bit more on in a bit. And I will be playing the cabinet of Dr. Caligari alongside Ben and Juliana.
Juliana.
Hello, my name's Juliana, and I play recorders and whistles, and I also use some live electronics as well. And I'm going to be playing the cabinet of Dr. Caligari with Ben and Rob.
Thank you very much. Adam, did you talk in our little opening melee? Do you think anyone heard?
I did. I just mentioned that I play piano, and I've done a couple of events already where I played a couple of Laurel and Hardy's and a Buster Keaton up in Weatherby and Cumbria.
Lovely. Trevor, I heard you echoing around at the beginning, but do you just want to try again and just quick introduction?
Yeah, I'm Trevor Bartlett, and I play all things percussion. So I've been playing silent films for 6 or 7 years now at Yorkshire Silent Film Festival and now Northern Silence. I play quite a lot with Jonny himself and as part of the group Frame Ensemble.
Thank you very much. Right. Okay, so we're going to chat for 30 minutes or so, maybe a little bit longer, and then have a bit of a free-for-all Q&A discussion. So in making music for silent films, there are normally two sort of conditions that that operate. One is that we are expected to play more or less continuous music, and that's very different from a modern film in cinema, where a 2-hour film might have 20 minutes of music, it might have 40 minutes, exceptionally it might have an hour, but it won't usually be fully scored. So continuous scoring, which of course means that the amount of music we're dealing with can sometimes be huge. And the second condition is that we are probably going to be working with something other than fully composed music. Partly it's a practical thing in that you know, if you're playing a series of silent films, you maybe have 10 hours of screen time, and no one can write 10 hours of music. So we're going to do something other than fully pre-composed music. But as we'll see, the kinds of ways musicians respond to that need to make continuous sound and do something other than composed music, the ways we respond to that can differ widely. And while we can all describe ourselves as doing something that we might call improvisation, in actual fact, when you dig down into it, you might find we're all doing quite different things, and that the word improvisation doesn't really tell us that much about what this or that musician is actually doing moment to moment. So let's jump in. Let's start with you, Jane. As you said, you played Diary of a Lost Girl, starring Louise Brooks, at the Star and Shadow cinema last week, and very beautiful and wonderful scoring it was too. And let's start at the beginning. How do you start? When I said to you, would you like to play Diary of a Lost Girl in Newcastle? And you said yes. What happened then?
Well, I've got a few other DVDs of films starring Louise Brooks and a few books, and I just went to them all and started thinking about her and watching the film, because I have access obviously to the film. Sometimes I don't have access to see the film before playing it, but this one I did have time, and I had a lot of time to really think about it and decide what to do with the different scenes. It's quite a long film, it's 1 hour 50 minutes or so. So I knew that it was going to be, and it was worth the challenge of really trying to do it well and get into sort of like a sound world of my own that I could trust and that I could just play around with. So I actually memorized some themes and practiced extending those themes and playing them different ways with different moods, and joining them together, mixing them up and responding to the film. I wasn't reading music or anything, but there are ways that I can make these short themes last a long time each and manipulate them as I go. So really it's kind of composing on the spot is my type of improvisation. It's not jazz, it's not this film anyway, although there are sections of swing and there's a tango section. There's mostly very emotional music, melodies and changing harmonies for that film. So I watched it and I looked at different scenes really, and I played it through. Or maybe I don't think I don't think I did play it through before the gig, not from beginning to end. So it still felt quite fresh.
The question of style, or as you put it, the sound world. I think a lot in terms of sound world as well, and sometimes I'll start a film only with a sense of what the sound world is, what kinds of sounds, what kind of world I'm making through sound. Sometimes that style decision is all you need to start. how did you identify the kind of sound world you were going to use for Diary of a Lost Girl?
Well, I suppose it's quite a mega film. It's quite big in its ideas and its the visuality of it, and the depth of the profoundness of it, really. So I guess because I'm from a classical background, really, and I went to sound world created by Brahms and the musicians and composers of the 19th century. And those sort of patterns that come under my fingers when I think of big chords and arpeggios and dark harmonies, but also there's also in most films which are very dark like this one, there are moments of fun and playfulness. So I really wanted to bring out them as well. But I think it's through time and just spending time practicing improvising at the piano and thinking about that film, it builds up kind of like a trust of what I'm going to be doing, so that I feel confident when I just go in.
Yes.
And I'm in darkness and watching the film with my fingers.
You won't be lost for sounds. There's always going to be sound made. That's the question that we're often asked as improvisers: how do you know what to play? And it's a hard question to answer, really, because there isn't any risk really of the music grinding to a halt. There's always somewhere else for the hands to go, another sound they can make. Let's carrying on with this subject of sound world. Let's zip over now to a very different sound world, to Ben and Rob and Juliana, who are scoring The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari in Farsley at Old Woolen in a week or so, I think. So. Talk to me about the sound world for this. Now, obviously, when I ask musicians to play films, it's often because they bring a particular sound world with them, and I think, oh, that's nice. That would be an interesting combination of sound world and film. So, what world of sound are you creating with Caligari?
I think so last year when you asked me to play and we kind of put a group together. That's really the start of the compositional process, or the preconceived process. I wanted these players along. I wanted Juliana and Rob this time, not just because I like them, but that's also the case, but because they bring particular sounds and instruments and timbres and textures that I think blend very well with what I'm doing and what I want as well. So and I come from a contemporary classical background first and foremost, so studied composition until relatively recently was basically just writing notated music for my work. And so I think the sounds are quite creepy and quite weird and quite unsettling. And Juliana's bringing some vocals to the mix as well. So we've got which sound incredible for the sleepwalkers in the Caligari film. I think fitting very well indeed.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think one of the things that as a trio we do really well is we have this kind of really effective blend of the ancient and also the very modern. Juliana and I both play ancient instruments, yet both of us also use electronics. And in the middle of that kind of sits Ben's mixture of keyboard and melodica and synth playing, and again those combinations of things just result in a language that has something quite haunting about it, something very nostalgic but maybe also very fresh. I think as a trio that's something we really offer to the film.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well, and I would also add that specifically with my instruments, I'm a recorder player, and they're often associated with, and they've been used sort of to symbolize death and the supernatural, and I think that fits really well with this film and the idea of sleep and things like that. And I'm also bringing a contrabass recorder with me, and I'm going to be putting that through some delay and effects and loops and things like that. We're able to sort of build up these layered textures and then bring it in and out, which I think is really effective when it comes to sort of improvising to that kind of film.
Yes, and of course, it's a film, a very atmospheric film, and it's a film that has been, I've heard it scored so many different ways, from, if you like, sort of traditional silent film piano approach to a very immersive sort of slow moving musical textures approach. How have you, Ben and Rob and Juliana, how have you approached the question of how much of the film to catch? How much, to what extent is it sort of conventional film music, and to what extent is it more sort of immersive, flowing sound?
I think that was that kind of conversation that happened extremely naturally when we've been rehearsing the thing. That I'd say we're probably 90% of the way to doing immersive soundscapes fitting the mood, with moments of interaction when we think that they're really important. And when we were having the rehearsal, actually, Juliana in particular was kind of pointing out moments that she thought we could maybe attach ourselves to the music, attach ourselves to the motion, the images on screen a little bit more. And so we just had that conversation very naturally. It wasn't preconceived. We got in the room, we made our sounds, and then that kind of almost organically occurred. Is it all right if I talk about Frankenstein very briefly as well?
Yes, of course. Ben is also accompanying. So Caligari is the trio, and then we are doing the short 1910 Frankenstein, which is Ben Gaunt solo. So tell us.
So I'm doing for Frankenstein, yeah, the 1910 Frankenstein, Edison Productions Frankenstein, so super old old film. And what I'm doing with that is I'm creating a Frankenstein of a soundtrack where I take the recordings from our performance last year and cut them up and move them around, and now I've got this horrible creation. And so this one's come from a very different angle compositionally. But again, I think it's still, I'm trying to fit the mood rather than do the conventional piano accompaniment style. So we'll see what happens. But that's come from a different angle where I'm kind of recycling and reusing old sounds.
So, and the three of you are mixing electronics and acoustic sound.
So in differing amounts, because Juliana's doing the most amount of electronic manipulation with hers. Rob, we've got, I guess we've decided, we discussed a special moment where Rob's electronics will be used, because the ending to the film is terrifying. I find it's kind of a genuinely creepy ending, and so we discussed it. You discussed like maybe not bringing electronics this time, but then we kind of got working on the end and thought that might come about. And then actually for Caligari, I'm not using electronics, and I'm saving all of my electronics for Frankenstein.
Right. Okay. Electronics present a sort of sometimes a conundrum for the silent film musician, in that they are not always capable of responding quickly to changes in the film. So you work with electronics, and you are investing in longer lines of musical sound. And turning on a hairpin at every moment. And some films, of course, love that kind of treatment. Some films less so. Juliana, how do you go about combining electronic sound with live sound? I know it's an experiment. You've been experimenting with this for some time now.
Yes, I have. Yeah, and when I use electronics with my instruments, I like to sort of try and keep the sort of essence of the sound of the recorder. Still, if you manipulate the sound too much, and we were talking about this, if you're doing, because I work with a lot of extended techniques, and I think that if you
just explain extended techniques to the non-music students.
So extended techniques are just doing anything that's unconventional with your instrument.
Silly things with your instruments.
Yeah. For example, with the recorder, you can do multiphonics, which is where you get two tones at the same time. Sometimes they're quite nice sounding. Often they're quite sort of jarring. You can sing and play the recorder at the same time. You can try to think what else. There's all sorts of funny you can do.
You look on your instrument as having just a capacity for sound, and there are no rules, and you know whatever makes you.
Yes, exactly. And so you want to be able to hear those when you're doing them. So I'm using quite a lot of delays, and I'm also doing a lot of looping, which is where it repeats a section again and again. And this means I can build up textures But in terms of responding to the film quickly, one of the good things that you can do is sort of bring a certain motif back in again, just by fading it in and out. So I struggle a bit when playing with silent film, switching instruments. So, for example, when we did The Adventures of Prince Ahmed last year, the scenes changed quite quickly, and we would sort of decide on we're using this whistle for a certain character, or this sort of recorder for this, and then I would see the character and have to switch really quickly. The good thing about doing looping is that you can bring a certain, so we've got sort of like a creepy sort of quite ethereal vocal for the sleepwalkers, and I can just bring that in. Something here on the screen. So it's actually, in some ways, it's actually a help rather than a hindrance. But in other ways, it means that you've got lots of more things to think about and manipulate during the film.
I think expanding on that as well, or like kind of responding to that, is that Caligari is a lot easier to score, or I'm finding a lot easier to score than Nosferatu. And Caligari's got these longer extended scenes and is much more in the cinematic language that we're familiar with scenes that are longer and aren't changing so quickly. So there's a little bit of help there as well. Frankenstein is a much weirder film, but the electronics I'm providing for that are fixed. So the electronics are going to be attached to the film, and then I'm going to improvise on my melodica and glockenspiel probably alongside that. So there's elements of fixed and elements of improvisation intertwined, which is another way of kind of responding.
I find, just to add something to that, one of the reasons why I sometimes prefer to be a little bit more restrictive with electronics in this live setting is that the instrument I play, the nyckelharpa, it has 16 strings and a key box, and it's quite a complicated contraption. And sometimes I struggle to operate the electronics from a purely pragmatic perspective whilst playing it. So I tend to like to consider the moments that might be appropriate. So there's one obvious moment in Caligari we've landed on where I could pause, activate some electronics, and then make a texture with them that will really work in the film. But most of the time, with the way I play the nyckelharpa, it's quite involved, and I like to be able to respond to the film in a kind of sharper fashion.
Thanks. Now we're going to, Trevor and Adam are going to come to you in a moment. I'm in awe of musicians who juggle all of this hardware, instruments, technology, all together. Because one of the things that happens as you improvise at the piano is as it begins to flow, the piano sort of dissolves. It's in a way it's sort of not there anymore. You are expressing yourself through the piano. But pianists, we spend so much time at the piano, and it's all of its musical potential is all sort of laid out visually in front of us. It's very different to playing a recorder or a nyckelharpa or a string or heaven forbid, a violin or cello and improvising, where you have to make the note, you have to find the note. It's all there at the piano. And so this, I find that as you get into the film, it's the piano almost sort of stops being there. That's maybe less true when you're playing a film that's very cognitively demanding and you're really thinking, oh my God, what's coming next? But a lot of the time you're not really thinking like that. You're just going with the flow.
I wonder if that was similar there. Sorry to interrupt again. I'll let other people talk in a second. But back at silent film history once more, looking at the Wurlitzers and similar, when people were using in-house organs and had all the stops and bells and whistles they could control. I wonder whether that sometimes got in the way of their improvising, what their interactions were with that.
Well, the big cinema organs only really caught the end of the silent era. They were emerging in the 1920s, just in time for synchronized sound to come in. So they had more of a role actually playing between the films from the 1930s onwards.
Oh, right, okay.
So they were used. But I think the degree of improvisation that was used back then in the silent era is sort of hotly debated by me. A lot of cinema music was sort of what we might call light music, so playing, sticking together extant pieces. But there certainly was some improvisation. But it's always harder to sort of dissolve into your instrument when you've got lots of things to fiddle with. When you're if you're playing the piano, if you're not going into wacky extended techniques and opening the lid and twanging the strings and everything, you don't have much to deal with. And it you know, you can have that sort of experience of sort of melding with the instrument. Let's talk to Adam, and then we'll come to Trevor. So Adam, welcome. You are a jazz pianist who has been going on the journey of accompanying Buster Keaton, Laurel and Hardy. Why don't you start by telling us a little about what that's been like, actually telling us a little about the kind of music you make as a jazz musician and how you've gone about meeting silent film.
Yeah, I mean, as a jazz pianist, I do have a real interest in early jazz piano styles, ragtime, stride, boogie, but in my own music, I've always blended those with contemporary idioms. And I think with silent comedy, that vocabulary has given me a kind of a way in, you know, things that are under my fingers that seem to blend well with the film. And so then it kind of highlights particular problems in accompanying silent comedy that I've become really, you know, obsessed about nailing. And so, for example, in silent comedy, there are very finely wrought kind of structures that go on. You've got setups, you've got payoffs, you've got little bits of business, you've got character gestures, all things that as a pianist I want to bring out, allow to have as much impact as it ought to, not get in its way, and work with the film to help all those moments land. And the good thing about being having a background as a jazz musician is that you're used to deploying aspects of vocabulary spontaneously or in different contexts, and reworking them on the fly. So that kind of allows me then to really think about things like tempo, or playing from moment to moment, or sustaining something. And I've also I've got it in my head that I want to be one of those jobbing accompanists where you can spontaneously accompany any film that's thrown in front of you. And as part of my kind of journey with that, I practice accompanying lots of comedy shorts, just blind, and seeing if I can get used to hang on, I tell my son to go away, and see if I can get used to my to the way particular actors and comedians build up their gags. So I'll have a kind of a Laurel and Hardy language, I'll have a Buster Keaton language, and little things that I know I can do. For example, when Hardy raises his eyebrow and looks at the camera, you know, I'll have a range of responses to that. And then the trick becomes not repeating myself and being able to develop those spontaneously, so there's enough variety every time. So if I'm playing 3 Laurel and Hardys, I don't run out of ideas after the first one. Yeah.
That's all very interesting. I'm just going to loop back to Jane, because we were talking about Laurel and Hardy, and you and I both played a 3 Laurel and Hardy show. Well, and you as well. We've all played these shows that are 3 Laurel and Hardy films lined up together. I think they're I did one at the weekend. I think they're the hardest thing to play for me there. And Jane, you commented that you thought they were some of the hardest silent film improvising that you had to do. What do you think makes them such a challenge, Jane?
I think because there are various thoughts I have in that. Technically,
share one or two of them.
I just have to work really hard. I mean, technically on the piano, you've got to keep the energy going fast, and it's umching to make it funny. You just think about what makes music funny as well. What makes a tune?
Can music be funny? I had an argument with Donald Sozin, a wonderful silent film pianist, about this. He says music can be funny. I say music can't be funny. Music can never be funny.
What's the best sort of music to play to a comedy film? Quite an interesting question when you get deep into it. But also with Laurel and Hardy, all the time there's tragedy happening. There's always chaos. There's always things falling over, or somebody's falling down a drain, or something terrible's happening. So sometimes you want to play just in the major key and fun musical. It's just a comedy film. And other times you want to grab that tragic disaster thing happening. It becomes all, diminished chords and dissonance, and then you go tuneful again. So it's deciding when to change and why.
Yeah. So they're more. I mean, the short comedies are which sort of belies their size, is they are more eventful than dramatic films. I mean, I'd always find 90 minutes of Greta Garbo a lot easier to play than 20 minutes of Buster Keaton. Yeah. The cognitive work is so different. There's always things happening in the Keaton. And what you said, Adam, about there being sort of small structures in the comedy film, a setup, a gag, another setup, a gag, and then these sort of longer structures over a whole scene. There's all of this network of structures that are all about timing, and when we play music over a comedy film, we're applying musical structures over comedy structures, and that creates this potential to collide, to dull the edge of a comedy moment, to sort of play too much. I mean, how do you and of course the whole thing also, which is what is very different to drama, is we have the vocalized audience response. We hear whether the audience is having a good time, and that's very different. So you can play 90 minutes of Greta Garbo and not hear a peep from them. So Adam, how do you decide how much to play, what to play, how to fit in with these structures, when to step out, when to leave? How much space do you give the film?
I think it depends on the scene, I've been finding. So there are some scenes, perhaps even in Laurel and Hardy, where it's more of an intimate character scene and there's more kind of interpersonal business going on rather than large set pieces or whatever. And in that, I definitely want to give their expressions room to breathe. And I found smaller gestures, just for, James talking about diminished chords. So I guess we're getting into chord types and like musical theory kind of based descriptions. But, a nice dominant seventh chord just when Hardy raises his eyebrows is all that's needed to bring that out. But then it also depends on the context. I'm going to need to make sure that I'm not changing key too often to distract from that, but also that I'm changing key enough so that the ear isn't getting bored, and that the surprise of the expression registers fully with the audience. And then, with big set pieces, like I did 1 week the other week with Buster Keaton, and I did try to give it a lot at the end. I tried to sustain that energy because I found when I first started doing this, I would deflate the energy of a film by playing too slowly or playing the same thing too much. So I tried to keep the tempo and the invention and the changes going in tandem with the film, and it was exhausting.
But hell of a finale, that film, with the whirlwind of the house and the two trains, and a great film.
And it gives you so much to work with. It's quite clear about what it needs, I found. So it was easy in that sense, and the audience was laughing so much because it's such an incredible film that helps buoy you up as a pianist.
Yeah, and with that sort of finale, in a way, you want to match the energy of the film. I played it at the weekend as well, and really you've just got to just match what the film is doing there. And of course, but sometimes in Laurel and Hardy, I'm going to quote the great Neil Brand here, who he says that sometimes in Laurel and Hardy films, the music just sort of hangs out with the boys, hangs out with Laurel and Hardy, and that's often in the early scenes when you see them. they arrive in the film for the first time, the music's just chugging along, but it's not really doing anything, and it doesn't need to do anything. Whereas with the Buster Keaton, I found that I wanted to catch much more within the piano playing, much more of the detail. But with Laurel and Hardy, the stretches of the film, the music can sort of chug along while they do their thing, before you then get into these sequences with comedy moments that you want to be catching all the time. But those feeling that I've always found that with comedy, one of the challenge is working out when I just want to hang out with the film a little bit, play it, and when I want to be right there, catching moments and driving the film on, because you can't do one or the other continually. There's always a sort of bouncing between the two. Trevor, you've been very patient. So, Trevor, you're a percussionist, and you and I have been playing together for some years now. So you play with pianists, you play with me, you play with frame ensemble, a piano, violin, percussion, and cello ensemble. You play with all kinds of people. How do you approach your part of this? So you're dealing usually with non-tonal sounds, unless you're on.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of what I'm playing is I tend to play unpitched percussion. So lots of drums, lots of cymbals, metalwork. When I'm playing with yourself or with the frame ensemble, I tend to steer clear of using any pitched percussion, marimba vibraphone, xylophone, things like that. I guess really it starts with what film we were playing and what sound world, going back to this idea of sound world, what sound world are we, or are you as the tonal instruments trying to create for this film? And then from that, I'll have a think and I'll try and work out and decide, well, actually, first and foremost, what instruments am I going to bring with me and have there on the day? I've got so many different instruments, I couldn't possibly bring everything with me to every film. And a lot of the instruments I've got would be redundant for some films. So really, a big part of it starts before I even get there on the day. What instruments am I going to bring with me? Then for me, I sort of see what I add to the films really as two different parts. A lot of what I'm doing is reacting almost as much to what the other musicians are playing as I am reacting to what's on screen. So a lot of what I'm adding is I'm adding different colors to your sound world, to your soundscape. So I often find when I'm playing a film, even though I'm sat there watching the film and reacting to the film as well, actually half of my concentration is on what other people are playing, and I'm reacting more to what I'm hearing than to what I'm seeing. Certainly if I'm playing sort of a drama, you were talking about Greta Garbo earlier, if I'm playing a Greta Garbo film.
Talking about Greta Garbo.
Absolutely, and why not? A lot of the time I'm not reacting to what's on screen, I'm reacting to what I'm hearing and adding colors to your sound world. If I'm playing a comedy or something with a lot more action to it, then the second part of a lot of what I do is deciding in a film, right, where are the moments in a film that I want to try and catch that action? And so I find that I'm flip-flopping in amongst what I'm playing, from adding color to the other musician's sound world, and then really trying to almost catch the audience by surprise by me catching certain points of action on the film.
Yeah, one of the things that I've always enjoyed about your playing is your ability to play not just what you see. I mean, we all begin as silent film musicians by playing what we see, but then as we develop, we start to edit a little this principle of playing what you see, and start to think about subtext, and maybe not playing everything we see, sometimes letting the film do things without us, sometimes taking a different position, sort of suggesting subtext or some sort of counter idea. I remember when we were playing not the Greta Garbo, stop talking about Garbo, Jonny, stop talking about Garbo. I'm obsessed. The Marlene Dietrich. It's good. It's
yes, yeah.
The Dietrich film where we see the man she's going to, when we see her for the first time, the femme fatale, and you played a sort of slow, a very delicate rumbling sound on the timps, but it was so gentle, it was so quiet. I wasn't sure whether it was in my head or in the music. And it was a beautiful sort of suggestion of of impending doom, but so subtle, so delicate that, and I do love that very sensitive playing that you do, which just
yeah, definitely. I mean,
story.
Sometimes I get the impression before we start a film, an audience will come in and they'll see this huge array of big percussion instruments, and they just think, "Oh my gosh, what is this going to be? It's going to be so loud. It's just going to be a distraction." And yeah, absolutely. A lot of what I'm trying to do is draw the audience into the sound world by some I can change the whole musical idea of what's being played just with one delicate sound on a triangle or a scrape on a suspended cymbal, and a lot of the time it's not a sound that the audience is expecting, and they don't really know where it's coming from. So yeah, for me, a lot of what I'm doing is, I say, adding color to what you're playing or to what the rest of the ensemble are playing.
Let's talk now about solo playing versus ensemble playing, duo playing, group playing. So we pianists, Adam, Jane, and Ben, of course, Ben, we're often just, what the silent film scholars call the lone pianist, sort of plaintively plinking away, just on our own. And sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're working with others. What are the ups and downs of playing with other musicians rather than just on your own? So, I mean, Ben, Rob, Juliana, as you're here representative of exactly that. What's it?
Well, I something that happens quite a lot, especially when I'm playing with musicians that I really admire, like Rob and Juliana, is that I might have some preconceived idea about what I think this scene is going to be.
Yeah.
And this happens both in the moment or in the rehearsal room as well, but preconceived idea about what the scene is going to be. And then I hear one of them doing something which is much cooler than my idea. And then you've got to kind of like lose the ego and be like, right, okay, I'm going to do everything I can to support that idea. And that's a really nice thing to have as a piano player, is somebody with better ideas than you.
Yeah, also, I mean, you're a composer as well, so I suppose Ben, the composer, has to take a slightly different position in those sort of circumstances, doesn't he? It's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. I still get to exercise my composing muscles in the gig coming up, because I'm going to be pre-making this electronic part that kind of scratches that itch even. But yeah, no, it's an awful lot of fun hearing somebody come up with a better idea than the one you had, and then finding how best you can support that idea.
With collaborating with other tonal instruments, so collaborating with other instruments that play notes, as opposed to sort of percussion like drums, or whatever, that doesn't play actual notes. Jane, of course, you do this with a violinist. Roddy, I can't remember his surname. I'm sorry.
Roddy Long, and I've also done larger ensembles as well.
And so, on the one hand, when we work with other musical instruments as pianists, there's this enormous gain in terms of color. All kinds of color is available, and I often feel slightly envious when I'm working with cellist Liz Hanks, and sort of experience how she can break the audience's heart just by playing one note, because a cellist can control every bit of the sound from its initiation, all of the insides of the sound, its full duration and its decay and cessation. Every bit of it is controlled, and just a single note can do so much when a string player can do that. Whereas with the piano, you just you can press a key, and then your decision is whether to just release it or do it. I mean, I'm leaving extended techniques aside. So it's
You should wait until you hear my melodica, Jonny. I'm going to break your heart with my melodica. Just one note.
I look forward to that. That's next week, guys. Next week, everyone in Farsley.
I think there's some interesting like halfway houses in all of that dialogue that get provided with the nyckelharpa, in that its charm and engagement is in how resonant it is, because it has 16 strings and 12 of them are sympathetic. You get these kind of cavernous and ethereal resonances.
Just explain sympathetic strings.
Sympathetic strings are strings attached to the body of an instrument like the nyckelharpa, that resonate in sympathy with a note that is played. So let's say when I play a D with my bow on the playing string, nyckelharpa is played with a short bow. There is a string under it tuned to the note D that will resonate as I play that same note. And it creates a kind of reverberance. And there is a note for each pitch on the nyckelharpa. Every note of the scale has a sympathetic string.
Right.
And the interesting thing about this is it enables, again, is really suits films where kind of haunting atmospheres are desirable, as the character of the instrument suits it. But there are other things it doesn't do in quite the same way as other string instruments, in that because it has keys, there's no vibrato, you don't have any way of producing it. So the sound is quite plain and quite flat. Again, very akin to early music string playing, where violinists in the Baroque period, like Bach, chose not to use vibrato. It wasn't really the done thing then. So in a way it makes sense. And in a way there's a different kind of emotional communication that what I play kind of provides.
Yeah, there's some of the things that you're mentioning there. Just bring up the subject of the degree to which the scores that we create can be seen as, if you like, effects tracks. Because sometimes with more sort of immersive treatments, quite a lot of what we're doing can become a sort of Foley track, or at least that's an option. You can make sounds. Stephen Hall does this with his company.
So sorry, Jonny, I didn't mean to interrupt there at all.
Okay, so sometimes we're using music. Sometimes we're using structured sound. Music which is always sort of going somewhere. It's always leading somewhere towards its cadence. Which there's a sense of forward momentum. And sometimes we're essentially playing little placed effects which don't have that forward momentum. We're just giving voice to some things within the film and balancing when we play an effect and when we apply the forward momentum of music. I'm going to Ben, I'll ask you about that.
Yeah, just because it also ties into what you were asking before about the tonality of things, or establishing a key or similar. Like, we don't have any preconceived agreement on what keys are going to be used in the piece at all, which is really interesting actually, because I Juliana and Rob co-run an ensemble, which I sometimes play with as well, where you do establish a key beforehand. You discuss what key is the improvisation going to be in, and then it's free from there. The Emergence, which is a very, very good group that they run. But what we can do with our trio is I can listen as Rob and Juliana have created this atonal, like, morphing texture, and then I can play something tonal over the top of it, and we get this kind of, like, I don't know, so this beautiful, or sometimes very strange, or sometimes very unsettling combination of those two worlds, which really suits me as a contemporary classical composer, because it's the kind of stuff we do anyway. But we're able to kind of impose keys upon something that originally didn't have a key, and we can do what you said there, both the soundscape and this musical direction and push to something narrative based simultaneously.
Yeah. Pianists. Adam, you talked about wanting to be the sort of the jobbing silent film pianist who can rock up and play anything. I understand that that desire. It's a lovely idea. Let's talk about that. We've all you've put yourself through, Adam, some performances where, because I've put you through them, where you've been called on to play without much preparation or any. Jane, you must have sometimes just played, a film without, with very little prep. Me too. Now, what's that like? I sometimes sort of think about it as, sometimes I want to prepare and plan things and think about how I'm going to play, make it sound well. And sometimes I just want to rock up, sit at the piano and see what I've got. I have to choose my opening gesture. I want to choose the kind of music I'm going to play. But once you start it, then this sort of linearity, it just sort of, one thing leads to another. The hands always go somewhere. Jane, what's the difference in terms of how it feels, or your relationship with the piano when you have the opportunity to prepare, and when you just rock up and play? You just watch what's on the screen and you play it.
Oh, I just love the rocking up and just playing what I see.
Yeah.
But I love that. But I've only really done that for short films, and there's quite a lot of film in the Scottish Screen Archive, which is wonderful, of street scenes and fairs and parades and carnivals and things like that. And the films would be less than 10 minutes long, and it's really fun. I think to do, an hour and 50 minutes is a different question though. I wanted to chip in to what you were talking about scoring for other musicians, particularly when it's not atonal, and the amount of work, extra work that it takes for a composer to get that score together with the amount of rehearsal time that you have.
Want to explain the dilemma of working with tonal instruments?
The dilemma is that if there's not one person in charge, then you can spend days and hours and weeks trying to get the thing ready to go. So I've found that from experience, it's better if one person, and it's usually be me, decides on what the chord structure is going to be, what the charts are, and what sections need to be prepared. Yeah. So a lot of the scores I've written are with forward moving momentum, and there might be a section of atonality which is really fun because you can be much more spontaneous about it. But the other musicians, violin, cello, accordion, double bass, for tonal music to actually make musical sense, you need it to have a structure within or on top of which to improvise. So I think it takes a huge amount more with the style that I've been working in anyway. A lot more work. But it's worth it in the long run, and if you've got the score written, you can easily get it together in the future. Again, we did Sunrise recently, and it was wonderful because the score was written 6 years ago, but it took about an hour or two to rehearse because it's all written down, and the sections of improvisation and the structures within which to improvise are set and timed.
This question of improvising with other tonal instruments, other instruments that play notes. So there's a coordination challenge. There's within certain styles of music, there are notes that go together and notes that don't go together. Now we in comedy we might use discord, sort of crunchy discord for dramatic effect. But if we're playing sort of song form type 20s or 30s music, then our use of discord wants to be quite controlled. We want to choose when we have it and not find ourselves colliding with each other in unwanted discord. With frame ensemble, which is piano, violin, cello, and percussion, Trevor, we don't do any pre-composition. We decide how we're going to begin, but then we negotiate live with each other through the film. Yes, I tend to set the entry into each scene, but then when a cello or the violin plays a note, it's both a limitation and an opportunity, because then there's a note. Sometimes Liz will play a note on the cello, and she'll be holding it, and I will make a choice about where to go, whether I'm going to stay out of it or whether I'm going to add something to that note or recontextualize it by changing the key around that note, So we have this sort of system. It's not a system. It's sort of a habit, really, of if you all move together, if piano, violin, and cello all move at the same moment onto a new note, that's when there's a risk of discord, of unwanted discord. Whereas if we're moving sort of around each other, but we're giving each other space to move, then it works quite well. And also because we're always sending signals to each other through the music. You can always hear. Except in those moments when I make a random and capricious key change, which really no one can predict. We're sending all kinds of signals to each other. Trevor, you often will turn up and play. You have a little look at the film, but you like to be very spontaneous, don't you?
Yeah, a lot of the time I'll make that conscious choice not to watch a film before I play it. So yeah. I'll turn up on the day, and I might have read a very short synopsis so I know roughly the storyline of a film, or I might have watched the first 5 minutes so I know how it's going to begin, and I might watch the final couple of minutes so I know when the film's going to end. And it's
always nice to know what the ending is, isn't it? What that last shot is, so you can time it.
But a lot of the time I'll have no idea what's going to happen in the middle. And for me, I like that, not just the challenge, but I like that spontaneity. Everything is absolutely me reacting to what's on the screen and what other musicians are playing.
So Adam, what's it like for you when you go from having preparation to just rocking up and playing? Very
Yeah.
much playing.
Well, at first, when I just rocked up and played, even when I was practicing, it was hugely disappointing. I would be so depressed because I couldn't nail the things I felt I needed to nail. But the more I practice doing that, and also the more I practice working through a film more carefully and developing ideas for certain things, the more that gets under my fingers. And I think a week before last at Weatherby, where I did a couple I hadn't seen before, I mean, it still wasn't where I want it to be, but it's getting better. I'm starting to respond to things with the things under my fingers that I can use. I think the worst feeling when I first started was feeling like I didn't have the stuff there to use, and I think the more stuff you get, the more you can improvise.
Yeah, I mean that's a difference, isn't it, between the short comedy form and then longer dramas. There's a sort of tangible experience of missing things as you play sort of short form slapstick, because there's how much to catch. You don't catch everything. You can't catch everything, and the audience tends to sort of accept the way it comes out. But there's so many possibilities, and there's always, oh, didn't get that. Oh, I got that. Oh, I didn't get that. I didn't get that. And all of that at the same time, you're keeping the film chugging along. You're trying to catch things. Spontaneity. Juliana, what are your reflections on spontaneity in playing? Do you sort of let yourself go? Are you bringing much preparation to things? I know you've talked about how electronics involves some pre-planning. What space is there for spontaneity in how you approach your playing?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I struggle with when I'm improvising to silent film is actually following the narrative of the film while I'm playing. And especially, I mean, as a sort of somebody who plays a melodic instrument, can't really do harmony, I'm usually playing in a group. And so part of that is you're having to sort of decide what kind of you want to add in terms of the emotive function of the film, but also be a coherent ensemble. Really difficult. So, and sometimes other people will have different ideas about what they want to do, whether they want to match the emotion or use a contrasting emotion. And so I really like to sort of know the structure of the film and sort of as an ensemble sort of decide what function we're playing in sort of each section. But in terms of sort of notating everything, I generally don't do that.
Okay, we've got just a few minutes left, so free for all. We don't have any questions, but have we got any questions for each other? Or you? Who's got a burning issue?
Yeah, Jane, when you were talking about the Louise Brooks film that you did, you said that you memorized a few themes for the film. I was just wondering, were they themes that you made up yourself for the film, or are they ideas that you got from somewhere else, maybe from already pre-written scores, and you thought, actually, I'll take that from there and I like that song from there? How did you come up with those themes?
They're my themes, but nothing comes from nowhere. They're quite derivative, really. But they became mine because I kind of built them into the whole idea of it. Yeah. And I think if you take three notes, there's so much you can do with that, and where that can go, you just take a small idea and transform it. So I've got a notebook. I use pencil and paper.
I find small ideas much more useful than big ideas in that, somebody will say, do you use a series of leitmotifs for every character? And I mean, I might sort of come up with stuff in the moment, but I can't. If I plan that and try and remember it, I won't remember it while I'm playing the film. And I find there's a conflict between being with the film, watching the film, and having it work on my and my intellect and my emotions, and then that coming out through the piano. I find if you stick in the way of that, plus you've got to remember these 11 themes that you've pre-written and you're going to use them, I find that just gets in the way of responding emotionally to the film. So I might use a little, a 3 or 4 note motif or something, but it's got to be small, otherwise I forget it. So, what about you, Adam? Yeah.
Well, when you were saying that, I was just thinking that you are very good at developing a theme or improvising with harmonies and chords and taking it somewhere in a narrative way. I think people without that kind of facility, like me, it might be easier to think in terms of blocks of things. But I certainly agree that thinking of a leitmotif for every character will take you out of being with the film.
Might as well compose a score.
Yeah.
We've got a question from Kevin Lowe. Question is, when you've accompanied the same film a number of times, do you find you end up going to the same sound worlds, or do you purposefully try and change it up every time? So who's played the same film a few times? Jane, what's your... Yes.
I do actually. I just go back to ideas from before. Just because I think once I've marked my stamp on a film, if I'm satisfied with it, then I want to just go back to it. And I have my scribble book. So if I've forgotten what I've done, I can go back usually to what I did before. But it'll never be the same every time because it's spontaneous to a certain extent, as quite a large extent. And so whenever you play the film, you can use the same short themes, but they'll be changed from the last time. But I probably would return to the same sound world.
Yeah.
I think that most films have a very strong sense of what they want from me, and my response to that film probably would be about the same the second, third, fourth time I've played the film. The Black Pirate, for example, it's very pirate-like and swashbuckling. So
yes, it's always going to want that, isn't it? I've had a bit of changing around with playing westerns, that I've sort of fretted about how much sort of Western musical idiom to use, particularly when I'm sort of playing around with that post-1950s Hollywood Western sound, which isn't always quite appropriate for silent film. And I've experimented with both absolutely going down sort of American folk music, Western style, Hollywood sound, and sometimes leaving that aside completely, or just slightly colouring an improvisation with that. And I still find myself in two minds about this. And I often find that with films that have a particular sort of idiom that maybe derives from their culture. And sometimes I want to adopt that like a suit of clothes, and sometimes I maybe think, no, I want to stay away from it. And so those changes can happen, but I do find that with feature films, you tend to sort of find that it's like every time you meet a film in real time with an audience, I always find there's always degrees of failure. It's never perfect. There's always a sense of what was missed and what was caught, of what was achieved and what wasn't. But it's often something about shape. It's about the storytelling, the sense of where the film is going to and how it arrives there and how it concludes. It's more of a shape and drama thing than a which notes am I playing thing. Sometimes the actual notes you play aren't the most important thing. It's about realizing the dramatic shape. Anyone else have any reflections on that question? Oh, we got another question as well.
Yeah, no reflections on that one, but I've definitely got some thoughts on this one coming up, this new question.
Right.
I've seen.
So would you like to read that question out, please?
Yeah, it's from David. Do you each find that you develop a favorite genre of film that suits you? And I saw that question come up on the YouTube chat, and I was, and I don't know whether I'd be able to do any genre other than weird sci-fi or horror. I think because you talked about almost like adopting clothes or kind of I feel like if I was to do a different genre, one of the comedy ones perhaps, either you're going to book me and you're going to get a very weird and disturbing and unpleasant take on that comedy, or I'm going to be wearing somebody else's clothes and I just don't think it would quite fit me so well.
Yeah, I also would echo that. I've really enjoyed playing more horror-oriented films my favourite one thus far was last year when, as part of an ensemble featuring Frame members and Juliana, we played Hacksan, the Swedish classic. Really terrifying film. I found that a really wonderful experience. I find comedy a lot harder. I think Juliana and I have discussed this a little bit, but the nyckelharpa and the recorder, different aspects of them are simply not funny, and they both struggle. With
No, we're not going to be having Laurel and Hardy accompanied by nyckelharpa and recorder just yet.
No.
There may be a moment. There may be.
The world is not ready. The world is not ready.
What about you, Adam? In terms of, because you come from a distinctive sort of aesthetic background as a piano player. So to what extent? I mean,
I think because of that, I have gravitated towards comedy because they tend to, the idioms tend to blend well with what's on screen, and then the challenges have become so interesting. But I do want to be able to accompany anything. I remember hearing you accompany a Western and thinking, I don't know that stuff. I don't know those Western kind of, it was a kind of 60s or 50s and 60s Western kind of chord progression that you were doing. It wasn't folk music. It was influenced by more modern cinema.
So-called cowboy cadence.
Yeah, cowboy cadences. I want some of those cowboy cadences. And and I've really enjoyed expanding my vocabulary in that way. Like, I didn't know how to do a kind of Hollywoody fanfare thing at the beginning, and now I'm all over that. So
expanding the vocabulary is, I mean, for me, that's a really central idea to being a film improviser. One wants, whatever you're put in front of, you don't want to be caught out by what might happen. Suddenly they start dancing. So I'm very bad at recognizing what a dance is. I can't tell the difference between a waltz and a foxtrot. So I just pick one or the other. I can normally spot a tango, but I'm very bad at that. But you want to have to hand what you need. And I find I played the Golem a few years ago, and I hadn't worked with essentially Jewish folk music before, and so I tried to learn the basics of it, and but I hadn't played it for any length of time, so I was finding that I was needing to sort of choose the note, think about how I was going to order the notes so I would get the color effect that I wanted from that. Whereas with Western music now, I sort of, once you've done it enough time, it sort of becomes, certain kinds of things become second nature. They stop being things you have to think about, and you just sort of play the shapes. You know where the hands need to go in order to create the coloristic effect you want. But that takes time with each new idiom. And there's certain styles of music I know nothing about. Hindustani or Indian music, for example. So it's there's a
probably
lot.
Requires you to be careful, doesn't it, as well, that you don't want to kind of misappropriate that music, or do a bad job of somebody else's culture. No. There's a lot of responsibility there.
Exactly. And I think sometimes the question is why do you want, to what extent do you want these coloristic effects? If the scene suddenly goes to China, do you need to convince the audience that you're gone to China by playing self-consciously Chinese music, or is that information they already have? So it's sometimes, sometimes in the heat of playing, the hands have to play something. They have to go somewhere, and sometimes terrible things happen, and the hands start just playing something. But
in that instance,
I take the point very much.
Yeah, in that instance, you might want to tell them more about what's happening in China at this point, and what the mood is and where the narrative's going, rather than the.
Yeah. Sometimes you just don't know that, and it's you've got to keep playing. But I do become. It's why I fret over Westerns. I sort of become I want to connect the films to other films. I want the audience to feel a sense of connection to cinema as a whole. But on the other hand, I don't just want to be regurgitating secondhand stylistic ideas. So, but it's every improvisation is sort of imperfect. I always kick myself for this, and this, and say, oh well, I'll meet the film again, and then we'll have another go. And that's essentially that's the life experience of an improvising silent film musician. There's always another go.
Sorry, Jonny, I did like the way you on the Western I heard you play. You were playing it as if we all had an experience of Westerns beyond the silent era. You were playing with our understanding of spaghetti Westerns, or understanding of John Ford westerns. And I thought that was very exciting. That allowed you to pull the audience along in a way that I think, being completely authentic to what would have been played, that would lose that.
Yeah. So it's 20 to 9. Do you have any final thoughts? I've had two great questions. Thank you, David, and thank you, Kevin, for those. If we don't get any more in, has anyone got any final provocative statements to leave us with?
I think just for me, going back to that last question, I don't necessarily think I have a favorite genre of film to play. I thoroughly enjoy playing all different sorts of genres, but I definitely find some genres an awful lot easier personally to play than others. I mean, I can sit and play German romantic dramas all day long and always have ideas.
Yeah.
We've sort of touched on it earlier.
We love Weimar silent film, don't we? We do. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, we do. We touched on it earlier. A lot of these shorter comedies I find much more difficult to play because everything on screen is moving so fast and there's so much happening, and you can't. Well, it's a lot more difficult, certainly for me, to decide what am I going to pick out off the screen and play.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Some films sort of seem to offer all kinds of potential. In other films, we have to work a bit harder to find things to play. Weimar, I love playing Weimar cinema, partly because the sound worlds that suit it are very welcoming of discord and advanced sort of harmony. You can really have fun with them, and you can really play around with co-improvisers as well on those. Whereas if you're playing Laurel and Hardy, then you want to be working with quite straightforward tonality in a lot of ways, though you can take it in all kinds of different directions. But there's a narrower sort of envelope of sound world within which the film functions. Whereas some films are tolerant of almost any kind of sound world. So there's always that sense of what is the performance envelope of the film? Where does the film stop working? And also I think, what does the audience expect? What might I offer the audience in terms of sound that they might welcome or might accept, even if it's not quite what they expect? And where does the sort of unspoken contract with the audience break? If you've invited an audience along to see Buster Keaton, and okay, we have nyckelharpa and recorder playing immersive sort of soundscapes, and we haven't advertised it as such. How do we honor that contract with the audience? I think in terms of, and sometimes I feel that those parameters are quite tight, and other times I feel you can sort of push them and extend them. I think we may have one other. Oh gosh, we've got two more questions coming in. Right. So David's back, and David says, do you take a different tack according to the age of the film, e.g. thinking about music of that decade? Right, yes. So 1900s, 1910, 1920s. Who wants to take that? Jane, do you take a different tack according to the age of the film? Do you, to what extent do you use music of the particular year or decade of the film? How much does that steer you?
I think I don't think I think about it very much, because what I'm enjoying about this work is just learning about music in all different styles and bringing elements of different things into what I'm doing. At the moment, putting together Salome for Friday night, and we're talking about going to Egypt or going somewhere to Jordan-ish in that area, and that part of the world, and whether to use a sort of strange scale or not, or what. It's a real challenge to decide how to approach it. But I do seem to generally go to a more traditional piano, as it might have been played in the 1920s or 1910s when the film came out, and drawing from music from the 19th century or earlier. But also I've got a background of swing and ragtime and old time jazz.
I mean, it's not for nothing that, I mean, 19th century music as a sort of starting point gives you a whole wealth of tonality that you can use. It's, you know, that's where Hollywood film music began from. I mean, because it gives you so many great tools for telling a story and supporting a story in sound. What about you, Adam? Because obviously with you working in jazz idioms, and you have a very playful and really beautiful way of combining period practices with contemporary edge and experimentation. What do you think about this question of
Well, I think that would mean that I wouldn't want to restrict myself if I was accompanying, say, a Chaplin short from 1915, avoiding jazz developments that came into circulation after 1915. That would be chopping way too much off. And I'm not sure the benefit, especially as considering the meanings of 1915 ragtime. It means something very different now anyway, so you're not going to be able to replicate the exact same meanings. So I'd be suspicious of somebody that wanted to be that accurate. Yeah. I do find, when you or Neil Brand, bring in quite sophisticated Gershwin-y jazz influenced language in certain things, that's going to work for an earlier comedy than Gershwin. I just don't think I can be that dogmatic about it. Probably also because I'm incapable of being that exact.
Yeah, I think in the end, I mean, it's with Pandora's Box that we played in Manchester a few weeks ago, when Louise Brooks starts to dance, does a little bit of a Charleston, we play something roughly equivalent to that, something which has that color to it. But most of the time in the film, we're playing the subtext, not describing where the film is taking place. And I don't feel any obligation to match. I don't want to jar in a way that annoys the audience or takes them out of the story. I want to serve the film. I want to invite the audience into the film and give them the experience that they want. But opera is just full of period discrepancies. I mean, Verdi didn't write Falstaff in Shakespearean time music. It's not. It doesn't. I feel no obligation to that at all. But I don't. I want the film to work. So. Whatever works. I think there are, here and there are moments where you do want to just absolutely catch something, but
yeah.
One final question from Ben Burrows. Assuming silent film needs to be accompanied by music to work, which maybe it doesn't, what are the things that music brings to the experience for the audience? Why bother? Why do we do it? What does it bring? Juliana, do you have to place you in the hot seat momentarily?
That's great. Yeah, I think no, I think that music, it's kind of, studies have shown that it's the biggest source of emotion in terms of changing your mood or changing your emotion. And so it plays a really important function, I think. And obviously silent films work without music because they're films in their own right, and so we have to kind of think about what our responsibility is as a musician, and obviously it can mirror the sort of emotions that's going on the screen, but it can also tell you what the character's sort of inner monologue is, and that might not be visible on the screen, and it might also be open to interpretation. So as musicians, you can sort of vastly change the narrative of the film, depending on how you interpret it. So yeah, I think that the music plays a really important function, and also you've obviously got this sort of creating the atmosphere that you're seeing, and what sounds like physically, the physical aspects of the film and what you can hear, and I think that's the sort of other aspect of it, and that's where the sort of extended techniques and things come in. With horror films and things, you can sort of mimic what's going on in the rustling of,
and you can have an instantaneous effect as well. I mean, melody and harmony needs to work over time in order to create effect, but with color you can create a sensation with the instantaneous uttering of sound through color and texture, and you can sort of give the air a quality. You can create a world, create a sort of temperature of emotion within which the film happens. So that's the great benefit of having all these colors to play with.
Yeah.
Ben, Jane, any reflections on?
Maybe nothing.
Bring to it.
Yeah, maybe nothing really further to expand on what I think were some very excellent descriptions there. But certainly it allows for more depth. We can provide multiple emotions simultaneously, or multiple colors and multiple ideas simultaneously, and turn it into more of an event as well. Turn it into something that you'd actually rock up to place for and go and see. Leave the house rather than something that you could watch at home, because it turns it into something where humans are playing live, and that's inherently exciting. That you're in a room where anything can happen, within reason. Certainly anything musically can happen, and the players themselves have this exciting energy. They don't know exactly what's going to happen, so nor do I as an audience goer, and I think that's quite an exciting thing.
Yeah, the liveness is important, isn't it? Yeah. I think the music also aids the audience in becoming an audience. You feel, watching a film in silence. I love watching them in silence. Sometimes it's the preparation I'll do for a film is just to watch a bit of it or all of it in silence, and just experience the movement on the screen, hear the sounds that are coming from the screen in that silence. There's silent films do sort of produce sound in the equivalent of the mind's eye. The mind's ear. You do hear a film when you watch it in silence, but. I think it's sort of the awkwardness of watching in silence as a collective group is dispelled by sharing the sonic experience, particularly important in comedy. And it also, of course, helps with the suspension of disbelief. It makes the audience more sort of willing participants. Once they've got over the noticeability of live music, and gradually forget you're there, helps the audience to cohere. Right. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, all musicians. Thank you to everyone who's joined us on YouTube. I hope that's been interesting. We've certainly, we've done an hour and a half of chit chat. It's been lovely to hear all your ideas, and thank you for the questions, everyone. Thank you so much. Northern Silent Film Festival continues until the end of October. So do come along if you're near one of our events, and I hope we'll see you at something again soon. Yes, see you at something soon. Okay, thank you very much. Good night.